So my name is Yam. I'm the CEO of a company, a small company called EMCIE. And you may have heard of our product here and there. It's called Parlant. So what what are we trying to do? There's so many agent frameworks out there today, and yeah, I guess we also wanted to build one. But the question is why? I think we had a slightly different reason. Um, so, I want to give you a small analogy. If you think about what does it take to deploy, let's just say chatbot. I hope I can say chatbot. It's not a taboo word these days. But let's say you want to deploy a Gen AI chatbot for like a Fortune 500 company with millions of users. Then everybody's talking about are you getting 80% accuracy, 90% accuracy? But just to put these numbers into perspective a little bit, suppose that you've really, really nailed it and you've managed to get 99.9% accuracy, which means that in basically 99.9% of the time, the bot's responses are, you can sign off on them, like they're good, and 0.01% are not, which means 1 in 1,000. So what happens is if you actually have like 100 million conversations every month, that's an extremely high number of conversations that something bad is happening there. Part of the problem is it's a lot, and the other part of the problem is that you don't really know what the scope of the issues are. So what we wanted to do was to just understand. So you can talk about accuracy in the sense of, well, do I just try to improve it all the time, or you can try to understand what type of accuracy really matters. So it turns out that if you look at how a lot of big companies, even companies like McDonald's, I don't want to name names so much, but okay, I'll say like Optum, a bunch of companies, how they've deployed AI agents so far. They first of all, they actually have, even before LLMs, because transformers have been around the block since 2017. So they've actually deployed chatbots based on transformer models for language understanding mostly, but they didn't generate the outputs. However, what happens when you use these models for language understanding is you still often get it wrong, and then you say something, but you say something that was pre-approved, but you say it at the wrong time, right? And it turns out that this is an issue that a lot of companies they've kind of learned to live with. They have all these processes for how to kind of vet, okay, even if I have this response, if it goes out the wrong time, it's not too bad. It's not the end of the world. Like the example, like it's not going to sell a Chevy for $1. So anyway, that got us to interview a bunch of these big companies and understand what's important to them. And it turns out that what's really, really important when you deploy a chatbot, not just for a demo, as everybody knows, but for real production use, it's not just delivering correct answers. It's actually that users want to use you, want to use your bot. If they don't want to use it, it can be like Einstein. It can give them all the right answers, but nobody's gonna work hard enough to draw those answers out of it. So the question is, how do you create an agent that people want to use? It turns out that I'm not trying to pick fights here, but companies like OpenAI, Google with Gemini, etc. They're creating some of the most phenomenal technology in the world, but they're not like the focus is not on engaging consumers, at least not like in a domain specific setting. So incredibly useful chatbots, ChatGPT, etc. But they're not really like if you let's say you're building a chatbot for a hotel or for McDonald's or whatever, it turns out that the behavior of these LLMs is not great at engagement. And I think like virtually all of you can imagine that you've used ChatGPT and stuff enough. And then it turns out, and we learned about this. I guess, I know we were a little bit naive to assume that it didn't exist. But it turns out that there's this profession, an actual profession with like deep books on it called conversation design. And what these people do, these conversation designers, is they actually study the art of communication, like in engaging communication, much like UX designers study how to design proper graphical user interface. And and they apply all this knowledge to ensure that engagement goes up if you deploy a bot. The people actually use you. And I've heard things from designers such as, we changed one word in the agent's first message, and we got an 8% uh, spike in engagement from users, which is crazy. It just goes to show that, if you talk to somebody the wrong way, they're not going to care. If you talk to them the right way, then they might. And you can't depend on somebody else like OpenAI or whatever. You can't just depend on, okay, I'm just going to give some random instructions to my agent, just tell it who it is, what its job is, and then expect these pre-trained models to figure out your user engagement. But it turns out that if you know your customer, you know your business, then you have the power to create engaging experiences. And a lot of these big companies, they already have those guys, those designers. The problem is that there's really no way today. I mean, I guess there is now with Parlant, but aside from Parlant, there's no really, like, nobody's, I think, paying enough attention to, can you just let these designers have enough power to create the types of conversations they want. So they can look at a conversation and go, oh, no, here it should actually say something different. And then it wouldn't have lost this user. And if you allow them to actually step in and affect this change, then you're going to get a much better product. Now, so what Parlant is, and I'm sorry I'm not pulling up my presentation. I just figured, it might be more interesting to, kind of talk to you personally. But that's basically what Parlant is trying to do. It's like the vision is to allow anyone, actually doesn't have to be a human, but practically it better be if you want a good result, at least these days. Allow any person to look at a conversation and go, I would have done that differently, and I want my chatbot to do it differently, like the way I want it done with my customers. And Parlant is trying to ensure that once you give it this instruction, then it's actually applied consistently. And maybe at this point, I could share my screen, little presentation. Can you please let me know what the screen is?
We can see your screen.
Right. Yeah, a bunch of stuff. I'll share the deck later. Anyway, so yeah. So maybe I should talk a little bit about this. So if you look at how people are trying to affect some type of change on how the agent interacts, then you mainly see two approaches. One is prompting, where you kind of have you start out with like this sketch of the agent's personality and role and all that, but it quickly turns into spaghetti. I'm sure you've all seen it. And the problem, once it does that, then if you think about it, any token you put into your prompt, the LLM's context, basically pulls the attention a certain way. And anytime, if you give it to, let's say two opposing instructions, then you're pulling it both ways. At the end of the day, some of you might know this, when you're about to choose the next token, which you do auto-regressively, like in a sequence to produce the final output. But what happens is you use a probability distribution on the tokens it's outputting. So if your prompt is pulling in multiple different directions, then even if given the input, sorry, like the user input, the conversation, even if it biases it towards a particular direction, it still only biases it. So you might go like, the token that you want might now be like 90%, but that's still like one in 10 times that you're doing the wrong thing, only because your prompt was kind of pulling in many different directions. And that's one big problem with just kind of Wild West type of prompting, which we all do, we all do. And then, so there's the other end of the spectrum, the other extreme of how people try to fix this issue is they say, well, I can imagine how a happy path conversation would go. That's a flowchart. So they create the flowcharts. So I don't need to again mention product names. I'm sure you know them. The problem there is that we think, as engineers, we think about conversations as flowcharts. But I've actually talked to people who deploy these bots to production, getting like tens of millions of conversations every month. And real conversations do not go by your happy path, the happy path that we as engineers think of. And so it makes engineering easy for sure, but it doesn't create a good product. And we know that. So, I mean, how many bots have you used in the past 5 years before GPT? Those have been transformer based. So that's the problem with flowcharts. It's too rigid. There's too much structure. And what we're trying to do with Parlant is trying to ask, like, can we find a new approach that's somewhat of a sweet spot between the two? Like, not like completely unstructured so that you can't do anything with it. You can't enforce anything. You can't explain anything because everything is just one big blob. But also not so much structured that you only solve your happy path, your imagined happy path, and that's it. So that's what we call conversation modeling. We view it as like an evolving type of art almost. It's basically, I write it here like a response to a cry from the trenches, like anybody who's not just developed an LLM-based agent, but also given it to their business experts and suffered suffered the responses from them. They'll know that it's very, very hard to create a chatbot that business experts actually approve of. But that's what we got to do, right? So a few words about conversation modeling. And it's evolving, right? Parlant is now 2.0. We actually released a new version only a few days ago. But the main components, it's a very complex engine, but the main components is you use atomic guidelines instead of just prompts that tell the agent, like a general description of what's happening. You use atomic guidelines, which are, as you can see here, they give you contextual instruction. So I'll give you a quick example. Let's look at this thing. Right, so if I just put this in a prompt, this is a guideline. This is like a Parlant guideline. It's got a when and a then. So when this condition holds, then try to do this. It's instructing to the agent. And if you just put a bunch of these in a prompt, like I said before, you're pulling your agent you're pulling your model in a bunch of different directions. And also you may get like almost I call it like prompt leaks, where just the fact that it's in the prompt, if it's not the right time, it may still show up, right? So what we're doing with Parlant, the real reason why we separated these guidelines into condition and action is because then Parlant's engine can look at the condition, look at your conversation, and filter out all of the irrelevant guidelines. So I only have 15 minutes to talk here, and it's about to end. Basically, Parlant has a bunch of features. For those of you who are interested, I'm actually doing a workshop, a 30-minute workshop